Good afternoon. This is a somewhat brief, somewhat energetic, somewhat short, somewhat long, we'll see. Quick lecture, and we're going to discuss this in the block class, but I wanted to share with you one of the reasons that, one of the major impacts that the holiness movement had on history. Some of you have probably wondered in this class, and we're getting to the point in this class, why is a good number of the readings theology stuff? That makes no sense. This is a history class, not a theology class. Actually, it does. Because the biggest event in the middle of the 1800s was the Civil War. And the Civil War was brought on by a group of people. This group of people had a very specific set of beliefs. If you understand their beliefs, you can trace the context for this war to happen. Now, this is not your low-level 8th grade history class where you memorize names and dates. I am now teaching you with the historical context. And to be real honest, this is probably stuff that might be above your levels for an introductory class. But if I failed to share it with you, I would be failing to share with you the importance of our nation, our heritage on our nation. And that is this. The American Civil War, slavery, was ended because a group of people had two very specific beliefs. And again, this is a historical perspective. I'm not sharing my opinion here. The holiness movement, today and historically, has been defined by two specific beliefs, possibly others added on. So things like the inspiration of the Bible is a given. But these two specific beliefs are what one could call the core of the doctrine. Okay, and these two things historically have been the foundation upon which everything else was built. And that is the Wesleyan definition of sin. Okay, I'm going to read to you from John Wesley here. John Wesley stated, "Nothing is sin, strictly speaking, but a voluntary transgression of a known law of God. Therefore, every breach of the law of love is sin and nothing else, if we speak properly. To strain the matter further is only to make way for Calvinism. There may be 10,000 wandering thoughts and forgetful intervals without any breach of love, though not without transgressing the Adamic law. The Calvinists would fain confound these together." Okay? John Wesley gave us our traditional definition of sin as sin is a willful transgression of a known law of God. This comes from 1 John 3:4, where it says sin is a transgression of the law of God. Okay, transgression means an act, all right? An act of lawlessness or an act of we're getting to a little off topic here, but it means like something that you do. Okay, it's not like it's something of an omission. It means it's something you do. Okay, and the word transgression, you can go into define that word. That's not what I'm trying to do here. But the point there's a reason why I'm mentioning that. And the second, and he breaks it down here what Wesleyan and Calvinist, the differentiation there, and that Calvinists would confound these together. To strain the matter further is only to make way for Calvinism. This is usually, or this is sometimes regarded from a historical perspective as what separates Wesleyan Arminians from Calvinists is this definition of sin. And so that is the historical perspective on this principle. The second thing that the holiness people believed, okay, was that there was a specific second work of grace in which the sin nature could be eradicated from inside you in an instantaneous work. Okay, we call that entire sanctification. Okay, so it was believed that sin was a willful act or transgression against a known law of God, and that a person after salvation could get a second work of instantaneous work of grace in which the sin nature was eradicated and entirely removed, the old man, as the Bible refers to it, from oneself. Okay? Now, why are those two beliefs and why do they matter in history? What does that have to do with American history? Well, it's very simple. Slavery was viewed as a sin. It was not a sin of omission. It was a sin of an act. Okay? So the Methodists, or actually the Wesleyans, and the Abolitionists believed that they needed to eradicate or remove not only their sin nature, but evils in the world around them. Okay? Let me say that again in case you're having trouble following me here. This belief in eradicating the sin nature then spread. Not only did they do it inward, they wanted to eradicate their sin nature, they also wanted to eradicate societal evils and sins around them, of which the worst was slavery. Also, drunkenness, okay? They were the temperance movement and the women's rights movement, okay? I'm going to get into some of the people here in a second from that. But they also believed that sin, because it was a willful act or a willful transgression of a known law of God, that owning slaves was a deliberate act of wrongdoing. Okay, this is if they were Calvinists, and they used it, and the Calvinists often use a different definition of sin, as John Wesley mentioned here, to strain the matter further is only to make way for Calvinism. If they were Calvinists, they would say that God, they would have a view of predestination, okay, and a different view of predestination, and not believe that it was a deliberate act. Therefore, a person could, in the Calvinist mindset, could own slaves, all right, because they were already predestined to go to heaven or predestined to go to hell. Okay, what their acts or actions did not have anything to do with going to heaven. Okay, and this is not what the holiness people believe. So they viewed, because of their definition of sin as a willful transgression of the known law of God, they didn't say it was missing anything or omissions or sins of ignorance or anything like that. This is the traditional Wesleyan belief, and because of that belief, they viewed that owning slaves and being complicit with slavery was an act that was wrong, and they viewed it needed to be eradicated, just like the sin nature needed to be eradicated. So this is a theological concept behind the group of people which became known as the abolitionists. William Lloyd Garrison wrote The Liberator, the most noted abolitionist, the man who drove the abolitionist cause. Holiness background, okay? Greatly impacted with the Second Great Awakening. Now, I will mention here, he is the one person on this list who may personally not have been testified to holiness himself, although there is a very good chance he actually did. I cannot point to you to a specific passage that says he did. I can point to the fact that he was greatly impacted by it. Our book even mentioned, our textbook, a secular textbook, even mentions that. Okay? So he was greatly impacted and driven by this theological and ideological concept, even if he personally wasn't, although he very well probably was, did have a personal second work of grace in his heart. Okay? And these other people I'm mentioning are known to be holiness individuals. And when I say holiness, I mean holiness like the conservative or holiness movement in general, in their beliefs, okay? Charles Finney, okay? Charles Finney was believed and is the most powerful speaker in the Second Great Awakening. And he's the one who really established or really shared with many people about the fire coming down from the heaven and purifying your hearts. Okay, he talked a lot about that. The power of the Holy Ghost, just to transform your life into second work of grace. All right, and we look back at Charles Finney as someone who we may not agree with on every single exact thing of theology, but we look back at him for him as one of the people that we look back to for the entire sanctification. He's one of the people we look back to because of his powerful message and the way it transformed everything, and his preaching on the power of the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Charles Finney, president of Oberlin College. Charles Finney was a noted abolitionist, preached hard against slavery. While as president and working at Oberlin College, he allowed the first black person in a college in the United States, and he also allowed the first woman. So we've got Holiness Bible College, most noted holiness evangelist preaching against slavery, allowing the first black person, the first woman of any college in America. Oberlin College, the hotbed of the holiness movement, was also, not coincidentally, the hotbed of abolitionism. Okay? They applied their spiritual life to their society and their world around them. They got active politically against an evil that they saw because of their spiritual drive and their theological drive inside them. Okay? Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. Holiness family, holiness individual. Okay? And when I say holiness, I'm talking about the second work of grace, alright? Some other people here, Uncle Tom's Cabin was the most powerful book against that Abe Lincoln, when he met her, said, "Oh, hey, so there's a little lady who started the Civil War." All right, her book was vital in starting the war because it shared with the evils of slavery with millions. Okay, and it was a holiness individual who did that. Some other people that you might have heard of: Orange Scott, okay, Luther Lee, Leroy Sutherland, all hardcore abolitionists. They are the individuals known for founding the Wesleyan Church. Okay? Luther Lee preached the first ordination of women in America. Okay? So I'm just giving you a brief thing about what the holiness movement did. But I want to say this without going long on it. But without the holiness movements, there would not have been the Civil War and the freeing of slaves in the 1860s. It may have happened 30 years later or 40 years later. But it was the holiness movement's drive to eradicate the sin of humanity that they saw around them that led to the Civil War. Now, yes, you're thinking, how could a small number of society do this? First of all, you have to remember, 1/3 of all church people in America were Methodists. Okay? And a large number of those Methodists were hardcore holiness individuals. Secondly, we know in society that if a small group of committed individuals believe something is wrong or right and preach it and share it and teach it with hardcore, we know that it transforms society. We've seen this with Nazism in Germany, fascism in Italy, communism in Russia. We've seen this with the Mormon Church growing massively due to their restrictions on stuff. We've seen this with the Jehovah's Witnesses. We've seen this with Occupy Wall Street. We've seen this with the alt-right. We've seen this with the alt-left or the Antifa. Okay, I can keep going on and on. It is a psychological or psychosociological trend that happens, okay? And this is what happened here. But it is our heritage, our holiness heritage, that ended slavery. Without them, they were the driving force behind ending slavery. People believed that not only should they live, should they live without making any willful transgressions against the known law of God, and not only should they try to eradicate the sin nature in their lives, they should have others. They should stop other sins that they saw in society, great evils of society, such as slavery, drunkenness, mistreatment of women. Okay, you will find that the three biggest things that happened that would not have happened in American history if it were not for the holiness movement. Let me repeat that. These three things were driven by the holiness movement. These three, driven by, not the holiness people involved. No. They often started, but were the driving force behind them. And that is the temperance movement, or the anti-drunkenness movement, the women's right to vote movement, and the abolition of slavery. Okay, the ending of slavery. Those three things were driven by holiness people who held these beliefs about sin, who held the Wesleyan definition of sin. Okay? And the Wesleyan definition of entire sanctification. Alright? So that is the historical background of why these views were so important. Okay, I'm going to talk more about that in our block class, and I just want to mention one more time here. I'm going to read these beliefs again, and because it's important to know what these beliefs were important. They transformed our world. But I just want to share with you once again, this is a historical perspective. I'm not going into the Greek and sharing my own personal opinions here. This is a historical perspective. This is the traditional beliefs of the holiness movement and what and their impact on the 1860s. Okay, so once again, these are the two beliefs that the holiness people. I talked to an expert about this the other day, and I say I talked to an expert. I was discussing this just and random with the leading expert on holiness and theology and the holiness movement, and he's also a historian. And I asked him what were the two core beliefs of the holiness movement, and he identified these as well. So this is not just my opinion on this. This is often regarded, or some have regarded, as the two core beliefs of the holiness movement, and that is that sin is a willful transgression against the known law of God, and that a person can be sanctified after salvation, okay, and the crisis point within the growth process occurs in an instantaneous in which the sin nature is eradicated from within, okay? John Wesley stated, "Nothing is sin strictly speaking, but a voluntary transgression of a known law of God. Therefore, every voluntary breach of the law of love is sin, and nothing else if we speak properly. To strain the matter further is only to make way for Calvinism." Okay, that was the core of that saying right there was the core of Methodism. Methodism, the most powerful sociological and cultural force in American history. It's the most it is what established many of the values we believe in that we regard as American today, or what used to be American, or Methodist beliefs and values. And it comes back to this concept. If anybody's curious to know where Wesley gets it, please open your King James Bible, turn to 1 John chapter 3. Okay, chapter 3, verse 4, it says, "Sin is a transgression against the law of God." Wesley added one word really there, or a sort of a word, to make it clarified there. He adds the word voluntary to make it clear it's a voluntary transgression, and he puts known law. So just to clarify there. But this is basically the exact definition out of the Bible that Wesley took and that he shared. And read all of 1 John, it'll talk to you about that. But 1 John chapter 3 has a lot to do. It was those beliefs, idea of living above sin, living a holy life, eradicating the evil inside and around the world around him, that caused the Civil War, but also transformed our nation. Thank you.